Machu Picchu is one of the most photographed places on Earth, and yet, of all the ancient wonders humanity has documented, this is the one modern researchers cannot quite let go of. Not because it is remote. Cusco is 50 miles away. Not because it is high. La Rinconada sits higher, and people live there. Not because it is grand. The pyramids at Giza dwarf it. It is because of what recent surveys have quietly begun to find beneath it. A void. Then another void. Then a corridor whose geometry does not match anything the Incas are supposed to have built. For more than 100 years, the world has looked at Machu Picchu and seen a mountaintop citadel. In the last 3 years, a small group of geophysicists has begun to suggest, very carefully, that what we have been staring at all along is not a city. It is a lid. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will look at Machu Picchu very differently. First, let us understand exactly what we are talking about. Because Machu Picchu is famous, but it is rarely described in the specifics that actually matter. Machu Picchu is a stone city carved into a saddle of rock at 2,130 meters elevation on a narrow ridge above the Urubamba River in southern Peru. It contains around 200 structures across roughly 325 square kilometers of terraced landscape. The stones, in certain sections, are cut so precisely that you cannot slide a razor blade between them. There is no mortar. There are no wheeled tools in the archaeological record. There are no draft animals suitable for hauling the largest blocks, and there is no written explanation from any culture of who built which part of the citadel, or when, or why. If this is the kind of story you would rather sit with and skim, subscribe now. This channel goes deeper on ancient mysteries every week, and Machu Picchu is only the surface of what is coming. The site is officially credited to the Inca Emperor Pachacuti, built around 1450 CE, abandoned less than 100 years later, and hidden by cloud forest until 1911. That is the mainstream timeline. That is the story on every plaque, in every guidebook, in every documentary. The hairline crack begins with the stones themselves. Because when you look closely, and I mean genuinely closely, Machu Picchu is not built in one style. It is built in at least two, sometimes three, and they do not all seem to come from the same century. Now, let us go back to the beginning of the modern record. Hiram Bingham was a Yale lecturer with a small grant, a mule, and a local guide named Melchior Arteaga, when in July of 1911 he climbed a ridge above the Urubamba and found the citadel wrapped in green. He was not the first outsider to see it. Farmers had been living on the terraces. Earlier travelers had passed through. But Bingham was the one who published, the one who photographed, the one who introduced Machu Picchu to the world. He described the stones as being of the finest workmanship he had encountered. He photographed them extensively. He shipped thousands of artifacts back to Yale, where a significant portion of them remained for the better part of a century. But even Bingham noticed something odd. In his 1913 report to the National Geographic Society, he wrote that certain walls at Machu Picchu appeared to be older than the Inca construction that surrounded them, that the finest polygonal masonry, the seamless blocks fused without mortar, did not match the coarser fieldstone walls built on top of them. He suggested, cautiously, that the Incas may have built their citadel on top of an existing sacred site. He did not push the point. He needed his funding renewed, but that observation is on the record, and modern archaeology has largely walked away from it. The consensus for the last 100 years has been the simple one. Pachacuti built it, the Incas built it, everything under it is bedrock, case closed. Except the case was never really opened. Not properly, not until the last decade. The masonry is one thing, but the geometry of the site is something else entirely. Machu Picchu is not just built on the mountain, it is oriented to it. The main temple aligns with the June solstice. The Intihuatana stone, the so-called hitching post of the sun, casts almost no shadow at solar noon on the equinox. The room of the 3 windows frames the sunrise on specific ceremonial days with a precision that professional astronomers have called consistent, deliberate, and remarkable. This is not a supernatural claim. It is what the surveying data says. That alone should make you pause, but it does not stop there. Because in the late 1980s, an independent survey team from the Polish Academy of Sciences, working on a mapping project in cooperation with Peruvian authorities, noticed something that did not fit. Certain foundations at the site descended further than any Inca construction should have descended. In one plaza, ground samples came back with cut stone fragments at depths of 3, 4, in one case, nearly 6 meters below the current surface. Fine. Perhaps rubble, perhaps ceremonial infill, except an Italian architectural team working entirely independently on a UNESCO conservation study nearly a decade later reported the same anomaly. Cut stones, deep, not natural bedrock. And oriented, this is the part that matters, oriented along the same axis as the surface city above them. 2 teams, different countries, different projects, no coordination between them, same result, same axis, same silence when the reports were filed. Pause on that for a moment, because the standard story requires those substructures to not exist. Now let us talk about what happened next, because this is where the investigation stopped being incidental and started becoming intentional. In 2010, a French explorer named Thierry Jamin, who had spent nearly 2 decades hunting for the lost tomb of the last Inca ruler in the Peruvian jungle, turned his attention to Machu Picchu itself. Jamin is not a mainstream archaeologist, and mainstream archaeology has been public about that. But he had one thing the academics did not have. He had permission. Working with Peruvian officials, Jamin's team ran ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetic surveys across several sections of the citadel. The results, released in stages between 2012 and 2015, indicated multiple subsurface anomalies, voids, cavities. What appeared to be a rectangular chamber roughly 3 meters below one of the main plaza structures. Jamin publicly petitioned the Peruvian Ministry of Culture for permission to excavate. He was denied, twice. The reasons given were preservation-related, which is fair. But the international press coverage went quiet quickly. The story slid off the front pages, and that is where it sat for years. A rumor beneath the tourist route. Then, in early 2024, a team of geophysicists, led by Dr. Iván Rojas of the National University of San Marcos in Lima, working alongside imaging specialists from ETH Zurich, was quietly authorized to run a new, entirely non-invasive survey of the site. The technique was Muon tomography. It is the same passive radiography that was used in 2017 to confirm a genuine void above the Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid at Giza, a finding that took nearly 2 years to peer review, and which is now fully accepted. Here is what Muon tomography does in one sentence. Cosmic ray particles are constantly passing through solid rock. And by measuring how they slow as they pass through denser or emptier volumes, you can, over months of exposure, draw the interior of a mountain the way an X-ray draws the inside of a body. The Rojas scans ran for the better part of a year, between March 2024 and January 2025. What they returned was not one chamber. It was not 2. It was a network. At least 3 connected voids at descending elevations, aligned with the axial geometry that the Polish and Italian teams had already flagged decades earlier. The largest of these voids sits directly beneath the Temple of the Sun. Its dimensions, as best the Muon data can resolve them, are roughly 9 meters by 6, with a ceiling approximately 3 meters above its floor. That is not a natural cavity. Natural cavities do not have right angles. Here is where it gets genuinely strange. The geometry is one thing, but the acoustic properties of the site are in some ways even more remarkable. The ceremonial plazas of Machu Picchu have long been known to have unusual sound behavior. Guides who work the site daily can demonstrate it. Clap in one specific plaza, and you get a chirped echo, like a bird call, that acoustic engineers have compared to the well-documented Quetzal echo at Chichen Itza in Mexico. The stones say certain plazas were designed to project ritual chanting outward and downward to the terraces below. And when Rojas's team began mapping the resonance profile of the buildings that sit above the newly imaged voids, they found, and I want to say this carefully, they found that those buildings resonate at frequencies that only make sense if there is a chamber underneath them. But it goes further, because the alignment of the voids is not random. When you plot the descending network of chambers on a map and extend the axis outward, it points, not approximately but precisely, toward Huayna Picchu, the peak that dominates every photograph of the site. And on Huayna Picchu, at an elevation the Incas are officially credited with having built up to but not into, there's a natural cave whose entrance was, in the 1930s, walled off. The stones say the wall was Incan. The Peruvian government has kept that section of the mountain closed to the public since 1998. There is no plaque explaining why. And there is the water. Machu Picchu has 16 fountains fed by a spring whose source has never been definitively identified. The system carries clean water through the citadel with a gradient so precise that modern hydraulic engineers describe the design as functionally perfect. When the Rojas team mapped the Muon data against the surface hydraulic system, they noticed something they had not been looking for. The water channels follow the axis of the underground voids, not run over them, follow them, as if the surface city was, in some sense, plumbed to the chamber beneath it. That is not folklore, that is hydrology. Now we come to the detail that perhaps more than any other makes Machu Picchu impossible to easily categorize, because when the deepest subplaza stone samples, the ones the Polish and Italian teams had flagged in the 80s and 90s, were sent for mineral analysis, their fingerprint did not match the local granite. It matched a quarry on the far side of the Urubamba Valley, a quarry that the Incas would have had to move blocks across a river gorge to reach, a quarry that mainstream archaeology has not previously connected to the site at all. The stones say, this was not built where you think it was. The stones say, this was not built when you think it was. The stones say, Whoever quarried the deepest layer was not necessarily the same people who quarried the top. The most extraordinary claim to emerge from the Rojas survey is one that his team has been extraordinarily careful about phrasing. It appears in a preliminary technical brief circulated in late 2024 to a small number of institutions. It has not yet been published in a peer-reviewed journal. The claim is this: within the largest of the newly mapped voids, the chamber that sits directly beneath the Temple of the Sun, the Muon data suggests the presence of a dense, discrete object. Not the rock walls of the chamber, not backfill, not rubble. A distinct, geometrically regular object, roughly 2 meters in one dimension and slightly less in the other two, resting near the center of the void. The team has declined to speculate publicly about what it is. Off the record, in Spanish language coverage, the descriptions vary. A sarcophagus, some have said. A statue. A vault. The one thing everyone who has seen the raw data seems to agree on is that it is not natural. It is not a rock formation. It is something that was placed there, deliberately, at the center of a chamber that no living person is known to have ever entered. And here is where the withheld reveal cuts deepest. Because when a Peruvian journalist pressed the team for a description last summer, even a shape, the answer was essentially not yet. The team is waiting for permission for a second, higher resolution scan pass before they will describe what they see in more detail. They believe the object may be surrounded by, or may itself contain, additional material that a second scan will help them resolve. The Peruvian Ministry of Culture has not yet responded to that request. The researchers themselves acknowledge they do not fully understand what they are looking at. They use the language of geophysics, not of archaeology, and certainly not of tradition. But what they have recorded, a walled network of voids beneath the most photographed sacred site in the Americas, hydraulically connected to the surface, aligned with a peak the government has kept closed for decades, and containing at least one placed object at its center, describes something remarkably similar to what the older Andean traditions have said about Machu Picchu for centuries. The stones say something is beneath. The scans say the stones may be right. Now, before you dismiss any of this as speculation from a fringe expedition, remember where it is coming from, not from a treasure hunter. From geophysicists at San Marcos and ETH Zurich, using the same imaging technique that in 2017 confirmed the void above the Grand Gallery inside the Great Pyramid, a finding that took 18 months to peer review and is now fully uncontested. The Rojas findings are not yet in the peer-reviewed literature. That is important. They are being contested. Skeptics have pointed out, fairly, that Muon tomography is a probabilistic imaging method, that voids and dense objects in the data are inferences, not photographs, and that until someone puts a camera through a borehole, we do not truly know what is down there. That is honest, and it is correct. But every single one of the elements we have walked through can be dismissed individually. The polygonal masonry has a possible conventional explanation. The Polish substructures have one, the Italian samples have one, Jamin's radar has one, the acoustic profile has one, the hydraulic geometry has one, the muon voids have one. Any single anomaly is a curiosity, all of them together pointing to the same subsurface network, documented by teams that had no contact with each other, consistent across 4 decades of independent survey work. That is a different kind of question. Now step back and look at the full picture. What we are left with, after a century of investigation, is a site that has been declared solved, resolved, and moved on from at least 3 times, and which each time has quietly refused to stay closed. Bingham suspected the walls were older than the Incas. The Polish team found the substructures. The Italians confirmed them. Jamin's radar found the chambers. Rojas's muons found the network. And somewhere at the center of that network, the data insists, sits a placed object. The Incas, the mainstream story tells us, built Machu Picchu around 1450 and abandoned it around 1540. That story may be entirely true for what we see at the surface. The stones on the roof of the world may indeed be Pachacuti's estate. But every anomaly, the older masonry, the Cross Valley quarry, the walled cave on Huayna Picchu, the plumbing that follows the axis of the chamber beneath, points to something the Incas did not build, something they inherited or found, or perhaps deliberately covered. Machu Picchu, in that reading, is not a citadel. It is a marker, or a lid. And honestly, that is part of why this story keeps resurfacing. Because for a century, we have taken the world's most photographed ancient site at face value. Millions of people have walked those terraces. Not one of them, in all that time, has ever stood inside the chamber the scans now say is directly beneath their feet. That is not a supernatural claim. It is what the data says. The question is no longer whether something is down there. That question is, at this point, close to answered. The question is what? And whether we, the people alive right now, watching this, are the generation that will finally be permitted to know. If you have made it this far, you are the kind of viewer this channel exists for. So hit subscribe, because next week we are going somewhere the Rojas team has been quietly asked about and has publicly declined to comment on: the sealed cave on Huayna Picchu. the one the Peruvian government has kept closed since the late 90s. There's a reason it is closed. And we are going to walk through carefully what the actual record says about it. Before you go, tell me in the comments, which piece of evidence surprised you the most? The Polish substructures, the Italian stone that matched a quarry across the river, the acoustic resonance of the plazas above the voids, or the placed object at the center of the chamber? I read the comments on these ones. I want to know where your instincts landed. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.